They examined her ID, questioned her authenticity, and even called security, only to realize too late that they were on the verge of denying service to the one person who could end their careers in an instant. The thought had lingered in the back of her mind for months. At first, it was easy to dismiss, just a quiet notion, but the more she pondered it, the more it gnawed at her. Danielle Grayson had built Grayson Trust from the ground up. This wasn't just a bank, it was her legacy. She wasn't merely a CEO sitting in a high-rise office. She had dedicated years to ensuring her institution was different, accessible, and rooted in fairness. But was it really? That was the question that kept her awake at night. She had heard murmurs before, concerns about how certain customers were treated at specific branches. Nothing glaring, nothing that would make the news, just subtle unease. Stories from acquaintances, passing remarks from trusted individuals. At first, she had dismissed them. After all, her bank had strict policies against discrimination, emphasizing fair treatment and exceptional customer service. But policies were just words. Real change came from action, and Danielle needed to see the truth for herself, not as a CEO, not as a leader, but as an everyday customer. So today, that's exactly who she was. No power suit, no designer accessories, just a woman in a cardigan, jeans, and sneakers. She pulled into the parking lot of a Grayson Trust branch in Indianapolis, one she had personally approved 3 years prior. She had been there for the grand opening, shaking hands with the branch manager, giving a speech about trust being the heart of good banking. But today, she wasn't an honored guest. She was just another face in the crowd. As she stepped inside, the scent of freshly printed paper mixed with industrial-strength air freshener. It was a slow afternoon. A few customers waited in line, a couple sat in the lounge area, and a teller at the far end was counting cash. Danielle adjusted her bag on her shoulder and approached the counter. The young teller, mid-20s, pale complexion, dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail, glanced up. No greeting, no smile. Just a brief once-over before her focus shifted back to her screen. Danielle cleared her throat. "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal." Without looking up, the teller slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out." It was a routine form. Name, account number, withdrawal amount. Nothing unusual. Danielle took a pen from her bag and filled in the details. $5,000. A reasonable sum, enough to require ID verification. She handed the form back. That's when everything changed. The teller's eyes flicked between the form and Danielle's ID. Her brows knitted together, lips pressing into a firm line. A tension crept into the air, subtle but undeniable. Danielle waited, giving her the benefit of the doubt. The teller finally looked at her, really looked at her, and in that instant, Danielle recognized the hesitation. It wasn't about the amount. It wasn't about security. It was about who they thought she was. The teller's fingers hovered over the keyboard before she seemed to make a decision. Slowly, instead of proceeding, she placed Danielle's ID back on the counter. "I'll, be right back." Danielle watched as the teller grabbed the ID and disappeared behind a frosted glass door leading to the manager's office. Exhaling, slowly, she tapped her nails against the cool marble countertop. She had expected to be treated differently. She hadn't expected this. And something told her, this was just the beginning. But one thing was certain. Danielle wasn't leaving until she got answers. There was something unspoken lingering in the air, a tension she could feel but not yet name. Danielle glanced around, taking in the small details. 2 spots behind her, a man in business attire waited patiently for his turn. His suit was slightly rumpled, his tie loosened. He looked like he had come straight from work. When he had stepped up to the counter earlier, the teller had greeted him immediately. Across the lobby, another customer, an older woman in a floral dress, chatted casually with a different teller. No hesitation, no extra scrutiny, just easy conversation. Danielle turned back to the counter, her jaw tightening. She had been standing there for nearly 5 minutes now, waiting for an explanation, waiting for something that should never have been an issue in the first place. But she understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't just about protocol. If it had been, the teller would have explained the situation instead of walking off in silence. This was something else. Finally, the door swung open. The teller reappeared, but she wasn't alone. A middle-aged man followed, stocky with rimless glasses and a carefully neutral expression. His name tag read Todd Larson. Danielle immediately recognized the type. His smile was polite but too controlled. This wasn't someone approaching to help. This was someone evaluating her. She had seen that look before, just never directed at her. Todd stopped at the counter, offering a tight-lipped smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal?" Danielle nodded once. "That's right. $5,000. My account. My ID." Todd flicked a glance at the teller before looking back at her. "Mind if I take a quick look at your identification?" "Mind." Danielle exhaled slowly, keeping her voice even. "I already gave it to her." Todd didn't acknowledge the comment. He simply picked up the ID, holding it up to the light, inspecting it. Then his gaze shifted back to her. "Miss Grayson, is this your first time banking with us?" Danielle felt her stomach drop. The wording was careful, measured, but the meaning was clear. "Do you belong here?" Her tone sharpened. "I've banked here since this branch opened." Todd nodded, slowly, deliberately, like he was processing the information. "And you said you're withdrawing $5,000? Danielle's patience thinned. "That's what I wrote down." The lobby had quieted, not silent, but quieter. A few customers had started to glance in her direction, sensing the shift in energy. Todd turned her ID over in his fingers, and then, without even looking at her, he asked, "And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson?" Danielle let out a short, disbelieving laugh. There it was, the moment when professionalism cracked just enough for the truth to show. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Finance," she said carefully. Todd's smile was strained. "Oh? What kind?" Danielle let the silence stretch for just a beat before answering. "Banking." That made him pause, just for a second. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I see," he said slowly. "And this is a personal account, correct? Not a business one?" Danielle folded her arms. "That's what it says on the form." Another slow nod, another glance at the teller, more hesitation. Then, as if reaching some silent decision, Todd placed her ID back on the counter. "Unfortunately, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time." Danielle blinked. "What?" She straightened. "Excuse me?" Todd maintained his calm, measured expression. "We're unable to verify the transaction." Danielle felt her pulse spike. "What do you mean? You have my ID, you have my account number. What exactly needs verification?" Todd clasped his hands together. "It's just a precaution. We take security very seriously." There it was, the word people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. Danielle's fingers curled into her palms. This wasn't about fraud. This wasn't about bank policies. This was about something else entirely. But one thing was certain. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not without an answer. Danielle wasn't leaving until she had one, but Todd wasn't finished. And when he spoke again, she knew. This was about to go from bad to worse. "We're unable to verify the transaction." The words sank in. Danielle's gaze flicked between Todd and the teller, waiting, giving them a chance to correct this. Maybe they'd realize their mistake, process the withdrawal, and let her walk out without another word. But neither of them moved. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against the counter. "Todd," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What exactly needs to be verified?" Todd kept his hands clasped in front of him, his expression unreadable. Too unreadable. "Well, Miss Grayson, large cash withdrawals require additional security steps. We just need to confirm a few details before proceeding." Danielle arched a brow. "Like what?" Todd hesitated. just for a fraction of a second. "Basic account verification," he said at last. "Can you tell me the last deposit amount made to this account?" Danielle stared at him. That wasn't standard procedure. Security questions were normal, but that wasn't one of them. Not for a withdrawal, not with a valid ID. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The unspoken challenge. Was this a test? A way to make her prove she had access to her own money? Her fingers curled slightly against the marble countertop. "I don't have that number memorized," she said evenly. "But if you pull up my account, like you would for anyone else, you can see all my deposits." Todd gave her a thin, practiced smile. "Of course. But in the interest of security, we need to ensure the account holder can confirm certain details first." Danielle's jaw tightened. "I just gave you my ID." Todd didn't flinch. "I understand. But you'd be surprised how often fraudulent IDs come through." "Fraudulent." Danielle inhaled slowly through her nose. "I'm not withdrawing millions. It's $5,000, a fraction of what I have in this account. I've already followed protocol. So let me ask again. What's the real issue here?" Todd's expression remained neutral. "We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Grayson." Her patience was razor thin. "Todd," she said carefully, "if I were a man in a tailored suit, would you be asking me these questions?" For the briefest second, something flickered across his face. A shift in posture, a slight tightening around his eyes. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. His mask of professionalism slipped neatly back into place. "This isn't about appearance," he said smoothly. "It's about policy." Danielle let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that right?" Todd tilted his head slightly, choosing his next words carefully. "Would you like to try using a different form of verification?" he offered. "Perhaps a utility bill? A second form of ID?" "A utility bill." Danielle let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. "You want me to provide a second form of ID for my own bank account, where you are currently holding my money?" Todd didn't blink. Danielle shook her head, tapping her nails lightly against the counter. "All right, let's do this another way." She leaned in slightly. "Pull up my account." Todd hesitated. "You have my name. You have my ID. If you check my file, you'll see that I've been banking here since day one, that I helped open this branch, that I probably signed off on some of your training materials." Silence. The teller, who had been watching quietly, shifted uncomfortably. For a brief moment, Danielle wondered if Todd would finally cave. If he'd backtrack, apologize, handle this the way it should have been handled from the beginning. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as if making a reluctant decision. "I'm sorry, Miss Grayson," he said smoothly. "Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today." Danielle felt a rush of heat in her chest, not from embarrassment, from anger. She could feel the weight of the stares now, subtle glances from customers nearby, people sensing the shift in the room. The tension had become impossible to ignore, but Todd wasn't concerned about security. Danielle could hear it in his voice, that carefully measured politeness, the kind that made it clear this wasn't about bank policies at all. He had already made up his mind. He had decided she didn't belong here. And nothing she said was going to change that. But Todd had just made a critical mistake. If he had simply processed the transaction, this would have ended here. Now, Danielle was about to make him regret it. Except, before she could even speak, Todd did something that sent a fresh wave of disbelief crashing over her. Something that turned this from frustrating to infuriating. Before she could react, Todd reached beneath the counter, pressed a discreet button near the register, and called over security. Danielle went still. A uniformed guard stepped out from a back office. Broad shoulders, hand resting near his belt, his expression unreadable. But she knew exactly what this looked like. A bank manager refusing to process a transaction was one thing. Calling security? That was an escalation. That was a statement. Danielle let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She had dealt with men like Todd before, the ones who didn't expect pushback, the ones who made it their mission to remind certain people where they stood. But she wasn't playing into it. Lifting her chin slightly, she met Todd's gaze head-on. "You're really doing this?" Todd's face remained infuriatingly neutral. "We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers." A smooth experience, as if she was the problem. The security guard stepped closer, his voice level. "Is there a problem here?" Danielle turned to him, keeping her posture relaxed. "That depends," she said coolly. "Are you here to help me access my money, or just to escort me out?" The guard hesitated. His eyes flicked toward Todd, who gave a small, tight nod. Danielle let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Wow, so this is what we're doing." Todd sighed, like he was the one being inconvenienced. "Miss Grayson, if you'd like to return with additional documentation, we'd be happy to assist you, but right now we can't." "You know what's funny, Todd?" Danielle cut in smoothly. "I watched you process that man's transaction 10 minutes ago. No extra verification, no manager intervention, no security." Todd's expression stiffened. She stepped closer to the counter, lowering her voice just enough. "I wonder what's different about me." The shift was instant. The teller looked down, suddenly fascinated by the counter. The security guard shifted on his feet, his stance a little less rigid now. Todd stood firm. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Grayson," he said, voice flat. "But our policies are in place for a reason." Danielle held his gaze. Let the silence stretch. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag. Todd stiffened. The security guard's hand inched closer to his belt. Danielle didn't blink. She pulled out her phone and started recording. A ripple went through the lobby. Customers turned, sensing the shift. Todd's posture changed. Danielle angled the camera slightly. "I just want to make sure I get this on record," she said smoothly. "You're refusing to allow me access to my own account, despite providing government-issued identification, while other customers aren't being asked for anything extra, correct?" Todd's jaw tensed. Danielle turned the camera toward the security guard. "And you were called over for what reason exactly?" The guard hesitated, glanced at Todd. Danielle didn't move, didn't lower the phone, didn't give them a single second to regain control. A thick silence settled over the room, and then Todd made one final mistake. Todd didn't reach to grab her or push her phone away. No, he reached for her ID, snatching it off the counter like he still needed to have the final say. And that was his mistake. Danielle smiled, letting the moment stretch, letting him feel the weight of what he had just done. He had taken her ID as if he held the authority here, as if this bank belonged to him. But it didn't. It belonged to her. Tilting her phone slightly, she ensured the camera captured his face, the security guard, and the thick tension hanging in the air. Then, in the calmest voice possible, she said, "Todd, let me introduce myself properly." His expression twitched, uncertainty flickering across his face for the first time. Danielle plucked her ID back from his grip with deliberate ease, flipping it over and tapping her finger against the name printed on it. "You see this? This isn't just any customer's ID." She let the words settle. "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." The bank lobby fell silent. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, the teller paled, and even the nearby customers, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, stiffened. For the first time, Todd looked genuinely shaken. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his lips parting as if to say something. Yet no words came. Danielle took a slow step back, slipping her ID into her bag. "I built this bank," she continued, her voice steady. "From nothing. I signed the approval for this branch. I personally approved the hiring budget that got you this job." Todd's hands curled into fists. The forced politeness he had been clinging to vanished, replaced by pure panic. Danielle gave him a tight-lipped smile. And today, I walked in as just another customer to see what would happen. She tilted her head slightly. You know what happened, Todd? He said nothing. He couldn't. Danielle's voice dropped just a notch. I was refused service, lied to, humiliated, treated like I didn't belong. Todd finally blinked, his mouth opening. Miss Grayson, she held up a hand. No, you had your chance to speak, now you listen. She turned slightly, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear her next words. If I had walked in wearing a tailored suit, if I were a man, if I looked the way you expect a CEO to, look, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Todd's eyes darted to the security guard, as if silently pleading for help. The guard said nothing. The teller stared down at the register, looking like she wanted to disappear. Danielle let out a slow breath, lifting her phone again. Todd, let me ask you something. Her voice was deadpan. Should I send this footage directly to corporate, or would you prefer I handle this right now? Todd visibly paled. His mouth opened and closed twice before he finally stammered. Miss Grayson, I sincerely apologize. This was just a misunderstanding. Danielle arched a brow. A misunderstanding? He nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. I can process that withdrawal right away. Danielle let the words sit in the air before finally exhaling a soft, almost amused laugh. She shook her head. Todd, she said, voice almost pitying. You and I both know it's too late for that. Todd's face drained of color because he knew she was right. And whatever came next, that was up to her. But one thing was certain. His day was about to get a whole lot worse. Card clenched between his fingers, his face still drained of color. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. The teller refused to look up, and the customers watched with wide eyes, knowing they had just witnessed something far bigger than a simple dispute. Danielle didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had made her point loud and clear. But as she reached the door, she paused, glancing over her shoulder just once. Todd, she said smoothly, her voice carrying across the room, I suggest you prepare for that meeting. Something tells me it's going to be a long one. With that, she pushed open the door and stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind an entire bank still reeling in the aftermath. Todd still clutched the card between his fingers, his face pale, while the teller looked like she wished the ground would swallow her whole. The security guard, who had been so eager to escort her out, now stood awkwardly, unsure of his role. And the customers, they had stopped pretending not to watch. Danielle reached the door, then paused. Slowly, she turned back around. One last thing, she said, her voice calm but unshakable. She wasn't someone who let things like this slide. She had spent years building this bank, a place meant to be safe, fair, and welcoming. But today, she had been reminded that policies on paper meant nothing if the people enforcing them didn't believe in them. She let her gaze sweep over the room, then spoke again, her tone steady and impossible to ignore. This is the last time something like this happens in my bank. The words landed like a hammer. Todd flinched. The teller shifted uncomfortably. The security guard looked down. I won't stand by while customers are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or ignorance, she continued. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Everyone was listening. There will be changes, real ones, because if this can happen to me, the CEO, then I can only imagine what happens to people who don't have the power to push back. Silence filled the room. Todd swallowed hard. Miss Grayson, I assure you. Don't assure me, she cut in. Coolly. Show me. His mouth snapped shut. Danielle glanced at her phone, the recording still active. She stopped it and slipped the device into her bag. Corporate will be in touch, she said, then met Todd's eyes. And you? You might want to start looking for a new job. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out the door. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, Danielle had called an emergency meeting with her corporate leadership team. Every branch manager was summoned, Every customer service policy was reviewed, and Todd, he was gone, but she didn't stop there. She implemented mandatory bias training across all branches, introduced a new accountability system, and encouraged customers to report discrimination, no matter how subtle. Within weeks, the impact was clear. Employees became more aware. Customers, especially those who had been ignored or dismissed in the past, noticed the shift. And Danielle? She never forgot that day in the bank. Because it was proof of something she had always known. Real change doesn't come from words on a page. It happens when someone refuses to accept the way things are. And today, that someone was her. So if you've ever been in a situation like this or know someone who has, don't stay silent. Speak up, call it out, demand change. Because the only way things get better is when we refuse to accept anything less.